introduce, my name is James Williams, Director of Programs with MEF. MEF has been around now for 21 years. We've got 160 members from all across the world. We have 6 ecosystems, and one of those is connectivity, which is wholesale. So as Dario mentioned, this is the third time we've been running this event, and getting us underway today is one of our members, Kaleido Intelligence, represented by Nitin Bhas. Nitin, welcome to the show. Hi.
Hey James, good morning. How are you?
Hey, good seeing you. Good seeing you. So,
Nitin,
you've got a rather important role with Kaleido, given you're a research and intelligence company. You'll essentially manage all the insights.
Yeah. So
Kaleido.
I'm especially into roaming and connectivity strategies, looking into VoLTE roaming, IoT connectivity strategies, 5G roaming. We're going to discuss network sunsetting, and VoLTE roaming this morning, and it's one of the two of the most widely discussed topics. So yeah, really excited to be here discussing that.
Fantastic. So great seeing you, and take it away. I'll join you later. Bye.
Thanks, James. So okay, let's bring up the slides. Okay, so. Yeah, and thanks, Dario. Thanks, and it's great to be back for the MEF CONNECTS Wholesale event. Once again, a very warm hello to all our attendees. I hope you guys had a great day one with industry-leading discussions around the topics that Dario mentioned at the start. So first up, wish you guys a great second day as well. So once again, I'm Nitin Bhas. I'm a founder and the chief analyst here at Kaleido, looking into wholesale roaming and connectivity strategies. Very pleased to be presenting today some of our latest research and MNO survey findings around VoLTE roaming and network sunsetting. So today we'll discuss, where are we with VoLTE roaming? I think Dario mentioned it's a slow, it's been a slow takeoff for VoLTE roaming. We've been discussing VoLTE roaming forever now. Are we finally taking off? Are we seeing a change in attitude from the operators given the migration towards 5G and 5G standalone networks? What's happening? When can we expect VoLTE roaming to be the norm? So that's what we will discuss today, and I'll quickly begin with an overall market status on VoLTE from a global perspective. So what we've seen is, while deployment of VoLTE networks, domestic networks, accelerated over the last few years, VoLTE roaming has not yet become kind of the industry standard for many operators. We've seen how the pandemic changed the focus and roadmaps for many mobile operators around the world. So we've seen a lot of operators now prioritizing VoLTE roaming, especially given the fact that there is an increased and accelerated migration towards 5G and 5G standalone networks. So from a domestic perspective, we currently have hundreds of operators around the world offering VoLTE based solutions. In fact, there were 228 operators around the world as of April 2022, and what we've seen is this figure has grown consistently over the last 2 years. Now, what we've seen is the operators are not slowing down despite the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. I think James and Dario mentioned at the start that voice usage continues to remain important. In fact, during the pandemic, we saw how the average voice usage remained high. So looking ahead, we're seeing seeing 5G phones, the role of 5G non-standalone networks, or more critically 5G standalone networks. All this will contribute towards the sustained growth of VoLTE deployment. Now, I'm going to give you some interesting facts. So as of Q1 this year, 2022, there were just over 60 mobile operators around the world in 35 country markets that had launched VoLTE roaming services. Now, as of Q2 2022, by the end of Q2 2022, the latest numbers points us towards 134 mobile operators worldwide in 69 country markets having launched VoLTE roaming services. So that's more than double the growth. So while it has been widely discussed, or we've discussed this in the past, that VoLTE roaming adoption continued to be slow, what this indicates is that the situation could be about to change. So this is an interesting point. And what does this really mean? Does that mean VoLTE roaming is finally taking off, or does it mean that a majority of the operators have VoLTE roaming enabled? We'll come back to it shortly, because this is just a very interesting point to discuss. So Kaleido conducts multiple surveys throughout the year, and we conducted a VoLTE roaming survey earlier this year in Q2 2022. So what we've seen in recent years is that a lot of the telco operators in developed markets, as well as emerging markets, have announced big plans to decommission their 2G and 3G networks, and some have already shut down their networks. For instance, AT&T, the first of the big three mobile operators in the US. So T-Mobile, Sprint, they're going to follow next. We've seen South Africa just announced plans to sunset their 2G, 3G networks by 2025. We saw T-Mobile Poland announce their sunset plans this week. So there is this is drawing a great deal of attention towards the lack of VoLTE roaming agreements worldwide. And this is kind of working well for the industry as well. So if you go through all the list of operators who've announced or have got plans to sunset their networks, you're looking by 2023, they're going to start either by 2025 or just a few years after 2025. We know where we're headed. That's when the network's going to be sunsetted. So from our survey, what we've seen is, as that this is from Q1 2022, nearly 50 operators have shut down their 2G services, with another 70 planned closures over the next 8 years. And in comparison, I think around 20 operators have already shut down their 3G services, with 70 planned closures over the next 6 years. So as you can see from the chart, 51% of the participant operators who took part in our survey said that they will have decommissioned their 2G networks by 2023, with 24% confirming that 2G sunsetting is not on their roadmap. Again, that's an interesting point. What the majority of the operators who focus on sunsetting 2G and 3G networks is to refarm the spectrum. The survey found that 27% of the operators had no immediate plans to decommission their 2G networks. They will continue to use it specifically for voice services. In comparison, I think around 18% said they're going to take a wait and watch approach to see, all these announcements by their competitors. What are their strategies? So they want to wait and see how these strategies play out for their competitors. And I think there was another further 18% who said we're going to keep our 2G networks for IoT and M2M services. Bear in mind, a lot of the 2G network, a lot of devices like POS terminals, ATMs, and some of the other smart meters, etc., they still use these networks to stay connected. So that's one thing that the operators need to take into consideration. But having said that, it's clear to see where we are headed with the 2G, 3G sunset plans for the operators. Now, one thing that we try to understand from the survey was, okay, so what does it mean? What's the impact that the global 2G, 3G network sunset strategies are having on mobile operators' roadmap or priorities? In effect, what we saw was that it's expected to have largely a positive impact on operator strategies. I think around, as you can see from the chart, 69% of the operator respondents confirmed that this will indeed accelerate the VoLTE roaming rollouts with a focus on 5G roaming as well. And I think around 47% expect this to accelerate the domestic VoLTE rollouts. So there is an immediate, you could say that there is an immediate need amongst operators to assess their technology rollout roadmap, their sunset roadmap, when they want to launch 5G standalone, and to ensure that they are not compromising their roaming footprint or their roaming revenues, their wholesale revenues, inbound revenues. Now, VoLTE is fundamental, and it's a fundamental requirement to enable operators to migrate faster to 5G roaming services, at least from a standalone perspective. It's the first step to facilitate 5G roaming adoption around the world. And for that, you need to sign large-scale VoLTE roaming roaming agreements across global regions. So, in addition to that, the operators will need to continue their investments in an IMS core They will need to ensure that they are in a good position to take advantage of VoLTE and voice over new radio when the opportunity comes over the coming years. So a vast majority of the operators, we will see, or we will see that they will continue to shut down their 2G, 3G networks, and this development combined with stronger investment, stronger infrastructure, means that VoLTE roaming will play a crucial role while migrating to 5G roaming services. So we also wanted to understand what their plans are with VoLTE roaming. As I mentioned, this is a significant jump between Q1 and Q2 in terms of VoLTE roaming launches. What we've seen because of this 2G, 3G network sunset, and to free up spectrum to prioritizing IoT and 5G connectivity requirements, what it means is operators are finally prioritizing VoLTE roaming. And according to the survey, I think we're looking at 70% of the operators to have some form of VoLTE roaming agreement, in place by 2024. I think it's around 79%, not 70%. Previously, we saw fewer VoLTE capable smartphones, carrier interoperability, some of the key issues. That's not the case anymore. This has evolved over the years. I think from our survey, around 90% of the respondents believe that mobile devices are more inclined to support VoLTE roaming now than before. So it's a good place to be in terms of planning your 4G and 5G standalone roaming rollouts. But having said that, it is important to understand the different strategies that mobile operators have on mobile roaming, as in how they're approaching this. So as I mentioned earlier on, a majority of the operators focus on sunsetting 2G and 3G networks in order to refarm the spectrum. But the survey found that around 27% of the operators had no immediate plans to decommission their 2G networks. They're going to continue to use it for voice services. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, with around 70%, more than 70% expected to have some form of inbound and outbound VoLTE roaming by 2023, one of the critical aspects, and I'll just go back to the point I made at the start of this presentation. One critical aspect that operators will need to focus on is the number of agreements and the coverage, the geographical coverage that will be extended to these VoLTE roamings. So, as I mentioned at the start, despite the jump in VoLTE roaming launches, those with VoLTE roaming agreements are limited to a small number of agreements, and they do not cover the whole travel corridors around the world. It's still early days. You could have 70% of the operators launching VoLTE roaming, but if they have only select few VoLTE roaming agreements in place with other operators, then that's not a good place to be in. So with around 77%, I think, so one of the questions we asked was how many roaming agreements do you expect to have in place by 2025? And around 77%, a good majority of the operators surveyed expects to have more than 50, in fact, between 50 to 100. I think there was a small percentage who said over 100 roaming agreements to be in place by 2025. Having spoken about the investments that's being made in 5G and VoLTE services, what we are also seeing, I think this must have been discussed yesterday. There's a lot of messaging users, meaning the lot of millions and millions of OTT app users who are relying on such applications to communicate with others. And what this means is operators have the opportunity to use these OTT services to offload roaming customers' voice usage to OTT apps or via Wi-Fi networks. So this was also evident from the survey, where I think 71% of the operators with no immediate plans to launch VoLTE roaming, they said that they will enable OTT support for voice calls, compared to, I think, around 55% enabling Wi-Fi offload for supporting voice calls. Now, one of the key topics that I think we pursued, or we discussed in a white paper that we recently published, was on interworking. VoLTE roaming interworking is a key solution that's being offered by a lot of the roaming service providers, a lot of the roaming vendors now, that so that the operators who do not have VoLTE roaming agreements in place, how to manage non-compatible roamers and enables it to convert a non-VoLTE roaming call to a VoLTE roaming call. So this was one of the key requirements from the participating operators. So as you can see from the chart, around 57% of those participating operators said they will rely on such solutions from roaming vendors to support the voice calls while roaming after the sunsetting of 2G or 3G networks prior to launching VoLTE roaming agreements. So as I mentioned at the start of this presentation, VoLTE roaming offers several benefits, to the operators. Having said that, it still continues to witness a low adoption rate globally, and this situation has arisen from the fact that the implementation of VoLTE roaming continues to face technical, financial, and operational challenges, and several of these challenges or hurdles are very well documented. For instance, things like lawful interception and compliance, testing of the handsets, how do you bill, or the billing model uncertainties. All these have been very well documented challenges, which meant that operators have not been able to realize the full potential of VoLTE roaming. I mean, obviously, there are some global markets that are exceptions to this. We're witnessing countries like the US, Canada, Japan, etc., driving early adoption of such services, overcoming these challenges with other countries, especially in the European Union or the European region, looking to follow these markets. So the expected growth that we previously anticipated is yet to materialize. There are still, the VoLTE roaming launches that we've seen so far. It's still limited to a handful of bilateral agreements in place. So we're yet to see this, materialize and turn into a great opportunity. But having said that, despite these hurdles, VoLTE roaming cannot be delayed any further. As I mentioned, it's the fundamental. It's fundamental to 5G standalone roaming, and according to our survey, all these challenges, these are still continues to be the perceived challenges by the operators. Regulatory compliance, legal requirements, once again, number one challenge as perceived by the operators. The primary issue here is that lawful interception of VoLTE traffic can prove complex alongside network encryption that could potentially hinder voice calls while roaming. But what we've seen over the last couple of years is a lot of work being done by the GSMA as well as the operators and the vendors coming together and resolving this particular challenge. And secondly, testing of VoLTE roaming solutions, it tends to be complex, but there's a lot of investment going into that now. So for various reasons, this all obvious reasons, the entire exercise requires, large scale monetary investment. So given the pandemic, how it has had a hit on operator revenues around the world, and if you look into some of the financial performance of some operators, the issue is even more protracted in emerging markets. So what we're seeing over the last 12 months is that some of these challenges are being tackled head on. Operators are coming together, vendors are coming together, addressing these challenges. There is an increase in VoLTE roaming rollouts. The market's looking well set and well positioned for an increased adoption amongst operators. And it looks, it looks that 2022 to 2024 will be the year when VoLTE roaming finally takes off, as more and more operators continue with their announcement on 2G, 3G network sunsets. So just to conclude, as I mentioned, VoLTE roaming is expected to be the dominant voice technology in terms of mobile network connection in 5 years' time. And by then we will have millions of 5G devices in circulation. 5G standalone connections will will increase. All this suggests that VoLTE and voice over new radio will become even more important in the industry. So what what operators will need to do is continue their collaboration with their roaming vendors, test, trial, to enable a smooth migration across these different generation of mobile network technology, and to ensure that continuity in voice roaming services that they provide to their customers. We've seen some negative impact of the COVID on roaming and telco service revenues, but having said that, this is the right time and the right time of the day to partner with the right vendor to mitigate these gaps in roaming coverage, 3G to VoLTE roaming solutions, invest in interworking, invest in VoLTE roaming agreements, bilaterals, minimize any disruptions that you could potentially cost your customer, enable a seamless connectivity that meets the subscribers' expectations, and that's the way forward. So that brings me to the end of my session. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Hi, Nitin. So there is a question from the audience, and it is, what is the ideal scenario for VoLTE roaming from a regulatory standpoint?
Yeah, I think it's one of the key issue that's being discussed. As I mentioned, regulatory compliances was one of the it's one of the number one challenge that's being addressed by the operators, and it's a very well documented which scenario to use as well. The lawful interception is when you say regulatory compliant, the lawful interception of VoLTE traffic, it can prove complex. There's an as I mentioned, you need to take into consideration the network encryption that needs to be considered, and the industry as a whole has come together to discuss the various scenarios, and I think that we've reached a conclusion where what is the right way forward. Invest in those conversations, and then and as I mentioned, it doesn't require large scale monetary investment. Focus on those roaming deployments.
So, Nitin, are there any countries in the world that have actually essentially blocked 5G deployments because of that issue so far, or it's very fragmented as to how that issue pops up at the moment?
But I'm not aware of that.
I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm just asking.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. As I mentioned, what we've seen is a significant jump in VoLTE adoption domestically and VoLTE roaming as well. And as I mentioned, because when you migrate to 5G standalone, you can't switch back to a circuit switch networks, fall back to circuit switch networks. So that's why VoLTE roaming is essential for operators when they launch 5G standalone networks. So I don't see any markets that have essentially blocked it because of that. So yeah, I'm not aware of it, but yeah.
Okay. And just from your perspective and from what you're seeing across the market, the last point before we move on to our next session, because we're coming up to the end of time here, is that obviously lots of markets where 4G is around, but the deployment of it may not be that far and wide. The uptake may not be far and wide, yet people are implementing 5G already. Are you seeing 5G in some ways as a leapfrog over 4 to 5? So there's no logical progression, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., etc. Is there a bit of a leapfrog moment happening there?
So what we're seeing is a lot of the deployments is around 5G non-standalone, which uses existing 4G infrastructure.
Okay.
So operators who have invested a great deal of money into 4G networks, they want to really sweat their assets before they invest further money into 5G standalone. What we're seeing is operators who have launched 4G networks, they are really focusing on just launching 5G non-standalone. because even from a roaming perspective, it's just re-signing the document and then making sure they use their existing roaming agreements to continue offering that 5G non-standalone roaming, or faster speed as they get.
Okay, so it's a big move
from a
to go
domestic
that
market.
non-standalone from an organizational perspective, and
correct,
as well as the fallback.
Yes, and having said that, when we're seeing more than 20 operators around the world who have launched 5G standalone, so there's a lot of testing and trials being conducted right now amongst those operators to bring 5G standalone roaming into the picture, which will take hopefully another few months before we see some initial launches or tests from the launches from operators on 5G standalone roaming.
Okay, Nitin, that's been a fantastic insight, and thank you. So that's Nitin Bhas from Kaleido Intelligence. Thank you for joining us and talking about that topic. And I'm sure I'll see you around another working group at MEF very soon. Thank you. Bye.
Absolutely. Thank you.